Welcome in. It's Thursday. It is football, guys. It's the Audible Live here at halftime of Thursday Night Football. We have the Patriots and the Jets. I did miss if the Patriots did not get a field goal. So it is 14-7. We have Travion Henderson, 2 touchdowns. All the scoring in this game is Ohio State Buckeyes. Travion Henderson, 2 touchdowns. Justin Fields, 1 rushing touchdown. I actually record the DFS show with Devin Knotts and Phil Alexander right before we do the show. We start at 8. And so the Thursday night game's always on in the corner of my eye. And while we were recording, I was like, oh, it looks like the Jets passing offense is actually working a little bit in this game. And then we got done after an hour deep into the second quarter, and I looked at the stats, and Justin Fields had 23 passing yards, and it was like, oh, okay, this is where we stand right here on this one. But it's myself and it's my good friend Matt Waldman. We're here. We're ready to talk some football, and thank you for joining us if you are out there. How are you doing, Matt?
Man, I'm doing great, and I'm glad for the Ohio State fans out there. I mean, half my family are Ohio State alums. My father, my grandfather, my uncle, my cousins. I got a cousin who's going there right now. Probably, I think he participates in the marching band. So an all Ohio State scoring fest is probably something they're happy about. Me, I'm the lone Georgia boy, so I don't know what to tell you. And
Justin Fields has got a little bit of that in his blood too.
He's got a little bit of that in his blood too. And if I were going to make a joke, I would say that's probably the part that's got the 4 completions right now. But that's probably not.
They have some Georgia themes here on this Jets offense. They got Arian Smith there. They got Adonai Mitchell now as well, and Adonai Mitchell from the Colts, and that's probably a good segue to one of the first things that we wanted to talk about. You had done the great roundtable that you do every single week. I got to participate on it this week, and you had asked us a handful of receivers. Who do we think is legitimate? Who's going to continue going on here? You had Alec Pierce, you had Jameson Williams, and then the third one was Tez Johnson. And my answer was Alec Pierce on this one. And I know, Matt, you have a lot of thoughts here on Alec Pierce, and I'd love you to take that.
Yeah, because I mean, on Monday, I was, after watching Alec Pierce the past few weeks, one of the things that I just saw anecdotally was the idea that he was running different routes. And I didn't do any look at the data to support that. I just, from what I saw, he was running more timing routes and more intermediate routes, more outs, more comebacks, things I didn't remember seeing much of last year at first. So, I was thinking, wow, this is interesting. Like the combination Daniel Jones and Alec Pierce are running routes that I don't see Michael Pittman running. Pittman runs more in the middle of the field. He's famous for hitches, fades, and base corner routes and crossing routes, and then routes that are variations of that, whether they're whip routes or things like that. But he's not he doesn't run those routes that you think primary intermediate timing routes, the routes that everyone we've talked about here multiple weeks. And Pierce seems to be that guy more and more in this offense. Yes, he's got that huge yards per catch average, but it seems like his game's expanding from my perspective. So when I raised the question, you guys had some great answers, and most of you were all on the side of, I think Pierce is going to stay hot. And then Jason Wood was the dissenting voice in this, and and he brought up the logic of why I'm going to go with Jameson Williams instead. But he's like, I appreciate the arguments, but I feel like that he doesn't really run enough of a route tree. So I decided I'd look that up. Now I was editing the piece, and it was like 2:00 in the morning, and I realized that Woods was the last thing that I was editing together, and I was going to say I'll bite and write about this, and I realized I'd be up until my Chris Harris podcast at 10 in the morning, probably still doing all this if I did that. So I went to sleep instead and figured we could talk about it today. But I did look up his routes in 24 and 25, and he's actually on track to run about 30 fewer go routes, Alec Pierce, than what he ran last year. And then if you keep projecting forward, he's on track to exceed on timing routes, like the intermediate timing routes, like outs. He's running comebacks. Last year, he didn't run any comebacks. This year, he's already got 7, I think. So you're seeing a guy who maybe he's not running as much of the route tree as Michael Pittman, but the routes that they do run are complementary to each other, um and different types of routes. And I would say the routes that Pittman runs aren't really the what you would say are typically primary receiver routes. Like, I mean, they're in the primary receiver thing, but primary receivers tend to run the intermediate timing routes. They're the ones those are the premium routes. And those are going to Pierce. He's running more of those, either adding them to his tree or he's running more of them than he did last year. And it's fascinating that he's running a lot fewer go routes, but his yards per catch average is still it's the strongest in the league. So and the pivotal situations that he's getting the ball, I think, are also part of this. So I think that there's a little bit of a lingering past history characterization that he is a boom bust deep threat, when the reality is that it may actually be credence that this is changing. And I just wondered to hear what you thought about that, because from the data, it wasn't definitive, but it does show that there is a shift from last year, and that when you compare him to Pittman, Pittman's stuff's about the same, where whereas Pierce's is changing.
When I see Pierce, I think that because he didn't exactly take the league by storm early in his career, and I do think that in fantasy we tend to make assumptions about a player that doesn't do that and then kind of pops. And I think that the common belief for Pierce is that he's the type guy gets behind the defense, that defense forgets about him more or less. It's like Gabe Davis, basically. Like Gabe Davis would like get forgotten about with all the other pieces in the Bills offense and had that big 4 touchdown game against the Chiefs in the playoffs. But largely it's because of all the other things that are going around and the focus not being on Gabe Davis. For Pierce, when I see Pierce, I see a player he's fighting and he's winning the ball. It's a lot more like Mike Williams in Pierce downfield, as opposed to like a Tutu Atwell, Gabe Davis. Like everybody just forgot about this guy, and now he got free down the field. And that's the interesting thing that I see, him coming back to the ball a lot, winning the ball, because I think that that's what can translate to the shorter and to the intermediate areas of the game. That if you've got that body control, you're able to win the ball in downfield situations. Hypothetically, you'd be able to do that closer to the line of scrimmage as well. When I look at him and I look at Michael Pittman, there's a big thing coming at the end of the season for both of those players. Michael Pittman is going to be in the final year of his contract, $29 million cap hit. Alec Pierce is going to be a free agent after this year. And usually when those types of things happen in the NFL, you get movement. Something breaks. It's either going, and my assumption would be the Colts see Tyler Warren breaking out here as a rookie. They do like Josh Downs, who's been a little bit marginalized. He had a decent run the last couple of weeks getting into the end zone. Last week was pretty quiet. And then they've got Pittman there, who is going to be 30, and he's got that balloon on his contract. And it's Evan Ingram was similar type of situation where they had Brenton Strange behind him. They'd use a second-round pick on Brenton Strange. Evan Ingram had a massive balloon on his contract, and then he ended up getting traded to the Texans. I don't know that I think Michael Pittman is going to be a Colts next year. Is kind of where I see it working out there. And I think they probably look to trade him off of there in what usually ends up being a pretty lucrative market for starting wide receivers. And it's usually starting wide receivers get traded across the league. That seems to be the one position where players get traded. You rarely see these guys hit free agency. All the talk last year about T. Higgins going to be a free agent and everything, and the Bengals made sure to lock him up. You just don't see these guys hit free agency because it's such a valuable position, because every team wants multiple of these players. It's just really hard for that. And so I think the Colts can recoup value off of Pittman as he's approaching his age 30 season there, give Alec Pierce a new contract, then probably re-roll, draft your wide receiver 3, have Josh Downs there, have Tyler Warren, have Alec Pierce as your 3 trio primary receivers.
Yeah, I think that's great analysis, especially from the financials and how that translates to the field. And I think that it would probably be harder to find a guy who can do what Pierce is already doing Because I mean, look, the Chiefs have Xavier Worthy. Who would you rather have right now based on production?
Yeah.
Again, that's a misleading thing. But if the role is stretch the field and make big plays and average high yards per catch, well, one of them is managing to do that at a league leading level and producing in the past 6 weeks wide receiver 15 value. That's hard to find, and he seems like he's getting better. So that's harder to find. You keep that. It's easier to find guys who can run crossing routes and be, and you might stumble upon a full-fledged number one wide receiver caliber player, because I think Michael Pittman is. I take, it's easy to say now I take Drake London over Michael Pittman. I think we all feel that way now, but I mean, Michael Pittman to me is like a limited version of Drake London, a good player, but not a true primary type of guy who
Right.
got, who's got that volume, because who else did they have that was proven, and they schemed it up in a good way for him. He's a good player, tough, tough, tough. But yeah, that makes total sense that they would roll with those three, because
Mm.
you can give Josh Downs a lot of Michael Pittman's work. You can give Tyler Warren the physical parts of Michael Pittman's work. They can both give a little bit of the vertical end of that and do it in different ways. So all three of those guys can actually kind of make up the difference of the targets that are missing, and still give you the versatility, and they just become more valuable fantasy options as well, because Pittman's not in the way.
The Sauce Gardner trade where Adonai Mitchell was traded, I think, is so interesting in this conversation for a variety of reasons. There's the obvious one that Adonai Mitchell, second round pick, can do, maybe at the high end, can do some of the things that Alec Pierce can give you. And when they drafted him, they hadn't had the breakout season yet from Alec Pierce, so they probably said, we need this in our offense. Let's double down. Let's grab Mitchell here. Hopefully one of these two will hit. And then it hit for Pierce. But the other part of that is the draft picks that you traded to get Sauce Gardner, and then bringing Sauce Gardner in the salary slot that he's going to operate in. And so that's where the layers on this, the financial layers, the lack of draft capital because you traded for Sauce Gardner, the moving out Adonai Mitchell, who would be your backfill if you were going to allow out Pierce at free agency. It all just kind of lines up to pointing to moving Michael Pittman, recouping some draft capital for getting that contract off, re-signing Alec Pierce, and then re-rolling, grabbing that next young rookie that's going to be cheap, that can be that wide receiver 3.
Yeah, no, for sure. So you know what? Let's talk a little bit about another young player in the sense of still developing. And you cover the Atlanta Falcons. I just happen to live in the area. And I haven't really been following closely, but I had somebody on X say, this does not look good. And they showed me a recording from, I guess, Buck Belew's, the former Georgia quarterback, who was famous for handing the ball to Herschel Walker, who's, who has his own radio show for years down here in Atlanta. There was an interview with Penix, and I guess the gist of it was that Penix was saying, I don't really have anyone to go to when things aren't going well with this offense, or to talk about what's going on with this offense on the sideline. And that sounds pretty alarming. And I said, that's not a good look for anybody, because it kind of makes, Michael Penix look bad for saying it. But if he's going to say it, it must be a pretty desperate situation, knowing you've been in major college football with two teams. There's certain things you're not supposed to say, especially as the quarterback. So he's got to be pretty frustrated that he's going to actually say it. Then he's calculated what the blowback might be for him to risk doing that. And then it's just awful for the Falcons organization, because it makes them look like a more successful version of the Bears and the Titans over the past 2 years, with their incompetence of coaching staffs. And, that's fascinating too, because here's the other thing. Why can't he talk? I pick on Kirk Cousins. I know I do, but this is just another example of that to me. Kirk Cousins and everyone in the organization, Jeff, can say, well, Kirk Cousins has been really helpful to Michael Penix and they have a good relationship. Maybe they do. Maybe they do. But the actions that I hear thus far are Michael Penix gets drafted, Kirk Cousins complains to the media that he got screwed over and that this was a bad thing and that they should have criticized their personnel selection when it actually made sense, especially considering how unprepared he was physically to actually last the whole season. And then here we are. Michael Penix is frustrated. When you look at the offense, I like 2 weeks ago, I looked at that and was it the Colts game 2 weeks ago? No, Colts game was last week.
Colts game was last week.
Yeah. The game 2 weeks ago where basically Penix was and Drake London hooked up on 3 fade type routes for touchdowns. And I was like,
against the Patriots.
Yeah. Did Zach Robinson and company discover, or Penix say to Zach Robinson, this is what I was thinking, was did finally someone come and say, hey, look, the wheelhouse of my game is putting the ball in pinpoint areas for people to go up and get it. And we have one of the best guys we can have in the league to go up and get it in London. And then we have Kyle Pitts, who's never in Atlanta been given the opportunity to do what he did at Florida. Even with an aging Matt Ryan, at best they were throwing seam routes to him or a corner route occasionally that was wide open off play action. Nobody's been throwing him routes that you targeted him on routes that you saw at Florida, which were all Drake London routes that we saw against the Patriots 2 weeks ago. And I'm like, if they finally figure it out that this is what they should be doing, this offense could go on a tear because you've got maybe the best fade route thrower in the league who's being unused. You've got a great fade route receiver being unused and a great fade route tight end who's never been used this way. And they've basically been using them like Dalton Kincaid in the early career Bills mode. And he looks despondent whenever he's on the field. Like, this is like, you've literally taken away the best thing I do and everyone's criticizing me. And I'm never going to be good according to everybody else. And I just, and then that's got to mess with you. So now we hear that maybe there's some really issues here with like coaching and availability. And, you talk to beat guys. I don't in this team. What are you hearing and what do you think to make of all of this?
I've heard some whispers that Michael Penix is basically calling the offense, that Michael Penix is the one that is out there play by play, calling what the next play is going to be. So Zach Robinson's gone under a lot of heat. And there was early in the season, there was basically they couldn't run the ball at all week 1 against the Buccaneers. But John Robinson was able to have a big game, 100 yards receiving. They should have beaten Tampa, and they would have if they had a kicker. Week 2, they came out. They didn't throw the ball at all against Minnesota. They ran the ball down the Vikings' throats to the point where like this got a little bit awkward of like the complete lack of passing game in week 2. And then week 3 was when they got blanked by Carolina, and it was a mess of a game, 30-0, got blown out by the Panthers. The Panthers are a team that should not be beating anybody 30-0. Zach Robinson went down to the sideline after that game, and the offense looked really explosive in 2 weeks against Washington and against Buffalo. And then it stopped. It didn't look good at all for a little while. And so the Kirk Cousins point that you brought up, it's weird because it's every reporting around him has been basically he's been a consummate professional, but I don't know that he's necessarily
helping.
Like it's like he's like being very nice. Like it's like My read of it, because I did the training camp report. I read everything that I could all summer long to do those training camp reports. And my read of it was basically Kirk Cousins is showing up to work on time and he's being very nice to everybody. And he's basically just talks to David Sills, and they're the two old dads in the locker room, and they kind of just sit in the corner by themselves type thing a little bit is kind of been the read on it of like basically
He's quietly quit. I mean,
more or
that's what
less.
I'm
I
gonna
think that,
say. He's quietly quit, you know?
well, and the
Yeah.
interesting thing of it is when they really the shocking game. Yes, the shocking game was the Carolina game, but the other shocking game was the Dolphins game because the Dolphins were really reeling, and Penix missed that game. And if I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on a little bit, given the timing of when that game was and the reporting around Penix's injury to miss that game was a little bit like it's like he could probably go. It was right before the trade deadline, and the Dolphins, somebody in that Falcons organization might have said, "Hey, the Dolphins have been a mess. Maybe this is a good opportunity here
Yep.
for Kirk Cousins to go out and just light it up against the Dolphins." And I don't know if he just doesn't have it anymore or if Kirk Cousins is very happy in his quiet quit role in Atlanta, but Kirk Cousins did not light it up against the Dolphins in that opportunity. He did anything. He did the exact opposite there, and it was a mess. I jokingly said after the game, Kirk Cousins played this game like this was a showcase to trade Kirk Cousins, and Kirk Cousins is very happy with his family in Atlanta is basically the way that game kind of
Well,
played out.
well, I don't know where he lives, but I'd have to guess like Alpharetta, Swanee, or Cobb County is probably very nice, and he probably enjoys that. And
Kids are in school, and
yeah,
he's kind of at that point in his life. It's
yeah,
probably
I
didn't
get
want
it.
to ship up and move somewhere else. I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't
and
know.
we're
I
in the
mean, I'm
Bible
recklessly
Belt,
speculating,
so
but at the same time, it definitely feels like that's if I'm
yeah.
putting two and two together, that's kind of what it feels like happened.
Yeah,
But
and he's probably taking the approach that he heard Brett Favre take with Aaron Rodgers, which is like, I'm not going to be mean to the kid, but I'm not going to
right,
help him,
right,
But the sad part is he he talks a good game, like he's, all these things, but if he was really going to be helpful, he would be trying to help Kirk Cousins. I mean, help Michael Penix when he sees that there's no help being provided.
yeah, yeah.
And so, instead it's kind of more like, you know, it's the I'm popular enough. I know that I am, and everyone's gonna like give me afford to give me an excuse of like why I'm not really stepping up to be the leader that I claim to be. And I hate, no, I don't hate to rag on him about that because I don't think I really think his leadership deserves to be questioned from the get go of the draft all the way through to this because he's an aging veteran and he's and he professes some things and he's getting paid a lot of money and he's basically getting paid a lot of money to care for himself and not care for the team if that's what he's doing, if that's correct, and so
And
it's sad.
I'm not in the building. I don't
Yeah.
know exactly, but I'm saying that from everything that I've read and being being able to infer some situations, and realistically, I'm at a similar point in my life as Kirk Cousins is in some instances in terms of where our families are. And Kirk Cousins is very, very much more set financially than I probably could ever
Right.
imagine being. But and I'm not thinking about retiring at any point soon.
Yeah.
But I mean, my priorities right now are making sure my kids are happy and those types of things, and some of that's life.
And
But
and it's very possible that maybe, I mean, we don't know, and I'm just like we don't know for sure if what I labeled with Cousins doing is false. It could very possibly that Cousins did offer help, and maybe we don't know behind the scenes it was rebuffed. Maybe it was rebuffed in a way where he was like, but they all play nice with each other in the media because they're trying to be respectful and not create a problem in the media. So it could very well that he is the good guy in this mix and just going, well, if I got rebuffed in a way that I did, I'm not going to make that public, but I'm sure it's not going to keep trying to offer my help because it's clearly not wanted. But
yeah,
I would be, based on the frustration that we're seeing with Penix, I have to think that, and what we've seen with teams in general, the Titans, the Bears, the Browns, the Jets, where they would bring in a rookie and really not have a veteran presence, or that veteran presence is really in absentia. And there's not, nothing really, no support system in there, and it's just like good luck. That's not the way you create a quarterback room. I mean, even looking at the Caleb Williams situation as we have it, Tyson Bagent's promising enough that after year one with Justin Fields there, teams were calling and inquiring, about trading him for him in the offseason. They called and inquired this year, I think. But they kept Bagent for sure, but they brought in Case Keenum. You don't bring in a guy like Case Keenum, and he's the number 3. But they did that because they want a veteran presence, a guy who's been around, who can kind of provide somebody to talk to in that quarterback room and say, I've been in a number of systems. I've faced a number of defenses. I can draw it up for you any way you like. I can recognize everything that's going on and give you tips with that. I might not be able to execute it at the level you guys are eventually going to be able to, but I've seen enough of it so that when we're on the whiteboard, I can whiteboard the hell out of this. And that's going to help you. And I think that you would like to see them have a setup like that in Atlanta, but if it's Kurt's, but it seems questionable that there's structure in there to give Penix the support. And if he's calling plays, I mean, come on, it would be great to let quarterbacks call their own plays. It would be greater to give them the training so that they're doing it from a good foundation. And this does not seem to be it.
No, and Michael Penix is a very, very confident individual. Michael Penix is, it's in many regards, it's what you want to see out of quarterback, especially in potentially difficult situation. This team is far, far too talented to be 3-6. I mean, bottom line, there's way too much talent all over the board. The offensive line is very good. Obviously, we know Bijan Robinson, Drake London. I mean, Kyle Pitts has had a very strong season. On the defensive side, we don't ever talk about defense all that much, but AJ Terrell, one of the best cornerbacks in the league. Jesse Bates arguably might be the best free safety in the league. They've hit these rookies that
Jalen Walker,
edge rushers. Woo! Yes, there's way too much talent on this team to be 3-6. I think Raheem Morris is probably the real problem here in terms of, so a lot of the talk is basically, so the Cousins piece of it. The talk around the Cousins has been, he's a starting quarterback in the NFL. Like everybody in the organization keeps saying he's a starting quarterback in the NFL. And so that puts Penix in a tough spot because they're saying that, well, we think Kirk Cousins is a starting quarterback. And so that's why Kirk Cousins is still on the team, because they think that somebody should trade a starting quarterback price, or at least trade something to get Kirk Cousins. They don't want to just release him. But the reality of it is like you're talking about here, so many of these guys end up these backup quarterbacks that are career backup quarterbacks. They accept what they are. They accept that they're a backup quarterback, and they accept that like Jameis Winston, I think, accepted probably a long time ago that he's a backup quarterback. And I feel like he's probably very positive around like whoever the starter is. He's probably a great guy to have around Jackson Dart in terms of, like keeps things light and he can give insight, and he's not banging on the desk to say, I should be the starter here. I don't think that's the situation with Cousins. I think Cousins still views himself as a starting quarterback, and I think that the Falcons put it out there that they think he's a starting quarterback, which puts Penix in a difficult position. But they also say there's no question here, this is Penix's team. So that's complicated, and that ultimately goes to Raheem Morris as the coach. And I know Raheem Morris had a first time around in Tampa, had a little bit of a reputation of the players had fun with Raheem Morris.
He partied with them. I knew a player who played with him, got signed by them after leaving the Colts. It was Chad Spann. He's not going to worry about it anymore. But Chad told me during his rookie year, he goes, I loved being with the Colts. Peyton Manning had the neck injury, and he was like a coach. It was unbelievable what he did teaching wise. And then I went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and it literally was the day after they beat the Saints at home, and they were all partying. Raheem was partying with the players. He said, I couldn't wait to get out of there. and I ended up at the Steelers, and the Steelers were a class organization. And he went on and on about the Steelers, about in detail about why they were, what was different about them. And and he ended up playing with the Jets and the Texans before going to the CFL. So he saw a lot in terms of stuff. And the Morris stuff, he told me, was just like, he said, yeah, or you knew that organization did not have it together, and the coaching staff there. So I don't know if Morris has learned his lesson or not, or there's just political infighting, because there's a lot of teams that are open to backdoor political infighting, where the coaches are complaining to the GM, or the coaches are complaining to the owner, and the GM's complaining about the coaches to the owner, and then there's teammates complaining to the GM about the coach, and teams can be open to all of that. And if they are, you get these divisions that are not healthy. And I don't know if that's going on or not, but the way you're describing it sounds like the team's split on who they want to be their starting quarterback.
I don't think there's any split on who they want to be their starting quarterback.
Okay.
So I think it's clearly Penix's team.
Right.
I think I think it's, from my reading of the situation, it's clearly Penix's team. And I think that it wouldn't surprise me at all if Bijan and Drake London and Penix were very, very close. And
I'm thinking like the coaches, not the players. I'm sorry.
I don't even think it's there for the coaches. I think it's just complicated with Cousins, because at the managerial level, they think that they should get something for Cousins. They don't want to, and it might probably come down to Arthur Blank maybe at the end of the day. Everything comes down to the owner at the end of the day. But sure. Arthur Blank saying, we paid Kirk Cousins to be the starting quarterback for this organization. If somebody wants him, they very, very much put it out there that, Kirk Cousins is very, very available. Like, come trade for him, basically. And they didn't really ask all that much. They really just wanted somebody to eat the money, is what they were hoping for. Somebody would just eat that money that is due to Cousins. And that's why they didn't want to release him. My expectation would be that Cousins will not be a Falcon as of like the day after week 18 this year, basically. And then he'll be gone. And then I don't know if they don't get this thing on track, like this is a team that they think that they should be a deep playoff team at 3-6. If they don't get this on track and it ends up being just a train wreck of a season, I would be very surprised to see Morris keep his job at some level. But that's it. Like, we're seeing the Patriots against the Jets right now, and they obviously, Mike Vrabel went in there and just changed the culture immediately. We know Ben Johnson changed the Bears culture immediately. And I think that if a Mike Vrabel or Ben Johnson were the Falcons coach right now, you would have a very, very different culture, and probably, to be honest, very, very different results that is happening on the field right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to kid around when I say this, but Arthur Blank, if Arthur Blank were listening, which he's obviously not, I heard you, Arthur, tell a story at UGA at the business school about how, when you first went to training camp at Furman, and you observed the conditions that they kept wanting to take you to, like the president's quarters, and where you were staying, and show you how nice you were going to have it. And you demanded that you wanted to see where the players were staying, and they kept trying to steer you away. And then when you finally went to the dorms, you saw that that there were ACs that didn't work, and that the mattresses were too small for the players, and the towels were too small for the players, and that you insisted on staying with them, and that you were watching offensive linemen have to take 2 mattresses from the beds and put them on the floor to be able to sleep after all that. And you said, we're going to have training camp in Swanee and Flowery Branch instead after this, because we can't treat our players like this. Well, I know that you're trying to tout Kirk Cousins, but you're acting like the president. You're acting like the guy at Furman trying to give you the tour. And I understand that there's a lot more money involved with that, but nobody in their right minds looked at Kirk Cousins last year after that Achilles injury and doesn't think that he's damaged goods at this point. It's over. It's probably over. So, you're going to have to just eat that cost probably at this point and move on.
I think the way his contract is structured is basically there was a 2-year out into it. So they set up to be able to get out of it if something were to
Yeah,
happen.
they did.
It was just after year one, they didn't have that out there. So they probably knew that was going there. And probably at some level, they said if something happens to Penix, we view Cousins as an NFL starter potentially, and he can go in there and
Yeah.
hopefully we don't miss a beat. But
Yeah.
it's I think
He's
it's
he's still a starter in mind, that's for sure.
he is
Yeah,
100%.
and just not in body, and that's the problem. So, Trevion Henderson, 3 touchdowns.
3 touchdowns.
3 touchdowns, one through the air, 2 on the ground. That's pretty nice. I think a lot of people are like, well, why haven't they done this all season? But I don't know about you, Jeff. I watched enough of Henderson this week and every week. And I think the problem that people don't appreciate is that he's a gap runner mostly right now. And when you run gap plays, it's kind of all or nothing, even more in the NFL than it is in college. In college, you're usually athletic enough more than some of the teams you face, where you can cut back on a gap play and find creative opportunities if you need to. And if you hit a crease and it's a good crease, you're gone. Now we've seen some of that in the NFL, but you're not going to see the same level of cutback opportunities that a back can leverage unless they're ungodly. And Henderson's really good, but he's not ungodly. And on top of that, he's got momentum power, and momentum generated power. You get him a good head start and he's going to hit it hard and he's going to get a push for you. But you can watch him in the red zone where you can only get so much of some momentum downfield before you encounter somebody. And like he couldn't score last week on a play where he had a really nice second effort that Ramondre Stevenson with his big body and his contact balance, that's what he's built for. So they like having 2 backs because with Henderson right now, that offense is all or nothing in the run game to a certain extent, because if teams defend that one crease that they're trying to create in gap, it's all or nothing. And we've seen we've seen the nothing, and it's not necessarily Trevion Henderson's fault. And that's the thing. Like, you watch the games and you go, in order for it to be his fault, they'd have to be running more duo and running more power. I mean, not duo and zone, where there's multiple crease opportunities, and your job as the running back behind the line of scrimmage is to set those up. When you take that out of a running back's hands playing gap, and you're like, this is the crease, you only have so much wiggle room to create, and if it's not there, you just better slam your body in there and to the soft spot and get what you can, because we don't trust you. We don't feel like you're very that good yet in duo and zone. That's not your thing, but that's Ramondre Stevenson's thing. And while it may not yield high yards per carry work, he still makes something out of nothing more often than what Trevion would on those plays. And I think people don't want to hear that, or they don't understand that. And so they have to say that Henderson is just bad, except that when he hits a hole and he's just a boom bust player. He's more of a back who's not fully developed to be well-rounded in multiple offensive blocking schemes. But the scheme that they're asking him to run at, he's good enough to be very good. It's just that it's a boom bust scheme in the NFL if that's all you're running right now. And with Stevenson out, that's all they can really run with him until they put Terrell Jennings in when he was healthy, or D'Ernest Johnson, and run it. But neither of those guys have a lot of timing with their offensive line because they're new.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that happen with, especially early in the season with Henderson. I think it was Ramondre Stevenson's not quite as bad as most people in fantasy think that he is
Right.
a big part of it. And I think another part of it is the offense is not, while it's Josh McDaniels' offense, it's not Tom Brady standing back there as a statue making every single correct read and immediately dumping it down to James White if it's not going to be there. So I think there was a lot of like, and the other part of it, like Trayvon Henderson is not Jahmyr Gibbs. To be like, he's not Jahmyr Gibbs. Like I think it there. Trayvon Henderson was overrated by many in the fantasy hive mind. Ramondre Stevenson was underrated by many in the fantasy hive mind. The offense wasn't understood that this is not the Tom Brady offense that's just going to dump it down to a running back 8 times a game. Drake May is going to keep plays alive. He's going to attack vertically in ways that Tom Brady necessarily didn't do all the time. And it's just going to look different because of the skill set. And we've seen time and time again, mobile quarterbacks don't really dump it down to the running back all that much. And so I think that those things, and then it's really hard for people like when they do the analysis to recognize, oh, I read this situation wrong. It's more, oh, he must be trash. It's clearly it's like that guy's just trash.
Right.
And instead of like, no, I had a wrong read on Ramondre. I had a wrong read on like just multiple different things there. I think is a big part of it. Henderson is, for me, watching him closely at Ohio State, like it's just like something is not right. I feel like when, and one of the things like I go back to that I really enjoy that you've talked about in the past is like curvilinear motion, like curvilinear movement from a running back. And like James Cook does it, but Dalvin Cook was always a good example you go to, or Frank Gore. And it would be these things that just these natural movements that a running back, like when you know you're watching a really good running back, you see. And I feel like for Henderson, I didn't really like, I definitely see the explosion, and I definitely see like he's very good, but it's not like something is just not right. And
You're right. I mean, I felt the same way. I always thought he was overrated to the degree that people were pushing him because of the speed. And you're right. And if I were to articulate it, I would say it's the problem with him is that he's great in space. We know that. He's got a lot of speed. He can hit a hole hard. All that's good. When he sees a crease, it can be a small crease, he will hit it aggressively. That's a great trait and good vision and decision making to have. The problem is that if the crease isn't there, he doesn't have the ability to think on his feet fast enough to alter pace, alter footwork, manipulate the defense, and find a solution. His game short circuits if it's not there. It could be barely there and it doesn't short circuit. But if it's not there, he's like anti-Taj Brooks. Like they are like the opposite of each other as players. One's big, one's smaller, one's really powerful, one's not so powerful, one's not super fast, the other one is a speeding bullet. But Taj Brooks could have 3 gaps that are filled, and he's going to find a way to gain you positive yards. Whereas there needs to be a crease for Henderson. And I think that's what's missing is that most good backs in the NFL can create something out of nothing, and he can't do that consistently.
That, and it's like the way that I kind of conceptualize it is like Bijan Robinson is very good at this of like it's like you're making the guy in front of you miss, but while you're doing that, you're also setting up the next guy when you're also setting up the next guy too. And like, it's like, you're just setting everything up, and it's not like you're just not making this one cut because it's going to make this one guy miss. You're making this slight cut to make this other cut because you know that's going to change the direction that linebacker is coming out, but also it's going to change the way that safety's coming at you. And then it's kind of just sets it up to be able to get through everything. And I just don't see it with Henderson when it comes down to it. And I think that obviously we're seeing incredible production. He could be an extremely productive, great fantasy back without having that. It's just like to get up to that next level necessarily.
He's kind of an elevated version of Tevin Coleman. I think I never thought about it this way, but watching the Falcons all those years with Coleman was this way. He was a gap runner who played outside zone at Indiana, which outside zone in the way some teams run it, you might as well just be a gap runner. Like Iowa runs outside zone, but they won't let their running backs cut back. Like they make it a rule that they won't cut back. Because I know a guy connected to the program who told me they teach it that you can't cut back inside. You need to hit where it is. And I think with Coleman, they knew that outside zone helped because they could just run with his speed. And even if you only hit 3 plays a game, it was enough for them to win. In Atlanta, that didn't work because they needed him to be able to do all the advanced things within the outside zone scheme that wasn't taught elsewhere. And I think that I think Henderson's more along those lines. He might be a better Tevin Coleman in that respect, which means, yes, he could be what people hoped Coleman would be, but to a certain extent, but it may be limited in that regard. So, yeah.
And too, like the other part of it, I always laugh at, I mean, I know the game that we're playing, and we like the rookies and we like the explosive and all this stuff. Like the Patriots are 8-2. They were like 6-2 before they really got, and it's like how it is so hard to win an NFL game. Like, and when you're 6, I just am not. I feel like I am never going to criticize player usage for an 8-2 team,
Right?
Thought they were supposed to be like a 5-5 team. Like clearly something is working there and they know what they're doing. So it's sure. I've got Henderson in some leagues and it'd be great to see him go over and see him do the things that he's doing right now. But just like to sit back and say, I know better than these guys, I would be playing this guy, like just feels like the most, sorry, Joe, asinine thing that you can imagine, like think. It's just,
yeah. I mean, there's a fine line with that. It's you're right, because it's like, I think the first question we all reasonably want to ask is, what is it they're thinking that we weren't thinking? Because they're supposed to be the experts, and so I agree with you that the first mode of thought is probably best to have respect for the people doing what they're doing until you've seen enough to go, I don't know how I can respect that. I mean,
well, yeah,
what's conventional?
When you've got Arthur Smith and you've got Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts, and you're drawing up plays for Scotty Miller, like I'm off the bus there. Like when you're
right.
When you're 4-6 and you're drawing up plays in the dirt for Michael Pruitt and Scotty Miller, while Drake London gets 3 targets a game and Bijan Robinson's giving touches to Cordero Patterson, like that's where I'm off the bus. Like that's okay.
Yeah, same here. Like, or when you look at a play design and there's nothing there that says 3-step, 5-step, 2-step, punch drop, anything, and you don't know, and it just says get back there, basically. Yeah. And then you're in a room by yourself and don't have anybody to talk to about what should my drop be with this, and and then now you're like trying to throw to Tyler Lockett, who's probably run more outs than anybody that you've ever thrown a football to. And you drop back and finish your drop and you realize that he's probably got another 4 steps before you should have even considered throwing the ball. And you've already pulled the ball down once. And you're like, your timing's so screwed up with that. How are you supposed to be in time for pressure coming your way to move to your next read? If your first set of timing, imagine trying to perform a task within a certain amount of time. You're always going to have mental little mile post markers for that time. Like at 2 seconds, I should be here. At 4 seconds, I should be here. At 6 seconds, I should be here. Even if you're not thinking in seconds, you feel it because you've relaxed or you've practiced it enough that you can feel the timing, and something feels off because you've internalized that clock, And if you have no clock to start with,
Justin Fields.
Yeah, exactly. Or, Caleb or Cameron, Cameron this year, if there's no one telling you, here's the clock, how do you know at what point to move to your second read? If you don't even know when the first read is about to break. I mean, and you've been doing this correctly in other offenses before you ever got to Tennessee. So that's when it gets asinine, and we've seen too much of this. And I think part of it is the collegeification, or of these offenses in a way to like, you know, is maybe that's the bad side of it, is that you hire people who are just straight up not good enough to do what that needs to be done for the pro game, because there has to be some level of difference. I understand that you want to make things college friendly for the quick transition, but it's kind of like wanting to do that and then hiring something with no basic standard, no fundamental standard that you should have known that it was there. So let's end this way. You know what happened? What happened in Buffalo against Miami? I mean, because I watched Josh McDaniel, and Jalen Phillips talked in Philadelphia and was like, "I've died and gone to heaven." And what's the difference in the locker room? Like, they don't panic here. And I take that as, we wish Mike McDaniel well with his continued journey as in sobriety. I think that's great that he is working with that and acknowledged and doing what he needs to do. But I've felt after watching Skylar Thompson and Malik Washington, and I understand they're both guys that were favorites of mine. And it may just be my bias of liking those guys and not wanting to think that they're not as good as I thought they could be. But when I look at the roles they're in, they're very constricted roles. And when Skylar Thompson had to play, they shrunk the offense. They wouldn't let him go downfield. And when he went to Pittsburgh and he's thrown it down the field, and it is preseason, but he's lighting it up, and they're going, "What's going on?" He goes, all he said was, "I learned to believe in myself and be confident about my game and play my game." And that tells me what he was feeling was what I saw on tape and what we saw if we interpret it correctly, which is they had all these good weapons that were healthy, and they wouldn't let them throw downfield because they didn't trust them. And from what I hear all the time from quarterback coaches, is that young offensive coordinators with West Coast training, when they err on the side of not trusting their talent, and their system is everything. And if they don't have a player that they feel like is a long-term veteran who has proven it, they feel like they have to micromanage everything. Kind of like Sean McVay with Jared Goff, but then he got Matt Stafford and was like, he felt easier about being able to let the reins off. Or kind of like what happened with Skylar Thompson or Tyler Huntley when they got put in the game and suddenly they shrunk up faster than somebody diving in. Sorry, Joe, someone diving into a pool of ice water, I mean, basically that's how bad it seemed. And then you have, and then you have Malik Washington, who is a good downfield, go up and get it receiver from Virginia, and Northwestern, who really was physical that way. And they have him basically running these little short routes, and they lost Tyreek Hill, and it's like, well, let's go to the veteran Darren Waller. Let's go to the veteran Greg Dulcich. But we're not going to expand Malik Washington's role one iota. And you look at that and you go, there's a control issue here. So when I think of this team with these control issues, and they just blew out the Bills, what was going on in that game? Was this just a one-off thing, or is there more to the story?
So on Miami side, Jordan Rodriguez is awesome, and she did a really good podcast series called The Playmakers, where she kind of went. We're hitting all the sorry Joes here, but this is what they called them. They called them the Piss Boys when they were, and it was it was all the offensive minds. It was McVay, it was Kyle Shanahan, it was I think it was there was a defensive coach that was with him too, but it was Mike McDaniel, it was LaFleur. And so Rodriguez did this great podcast series where she talked to all those guys, all those great offensive minds, and just kind of unwrapped a lot of what's dominated offensive football in the NFL over the last 5 years or so. And there was one moment, and I apologize if I'm misremembering this, but the way that I remembered it was like you kind of had like they were talking about like scheme and players on one level, and it's the type of thing where like Shanahan and McVay were basically like, we're idiots if we do not think like having great players is like basically the only thing that matters at this level. And then McDaniel is like, it's by scheme, like basically like I can scheme like a like type was like the if that
The
wasn't the
dissenting
exact
voice in the
quote, like
room.
that was very much like the
Yeah.
sentiment behind like the way the conversation was basically, and or like the
Yeah.
so like there's that on the Miami side. But in terms of the Bills, I don't think they're very talented across the board is a big part of it. I think that Brandon Bean has missed in the draft in some big moments in some big spots. And so I don't know how many, I really don't know that they're the blue chip ratio. The blue chip ratio is what I'm thinking in my mind, but I don't know if it's necessarily the blue chip ratio. But when I look across their roster, like how many blue chip players do they really have at some level? I think is a big part of it. And with the offense, I mean, we know what Patrick Mahomes is. And we knew what Patrick Mahomes was when he had Tyreek Hill. And we knew what Patrick Mahomes was in the conversation around Patrick Mahomes when he had Sky Moore and Marcus Valdes-Scantling out there. And the knee-jerk microwave culture said the league figured out Patrick Mahomes. Like he's nowhere near as good as we thought he was. And then all of a sudden now he gets Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy, and it's Patrick Mahomes is back, and it matters who you're throwing to. It's Tom Brady. Like Tom Brady when he was throwing it to the ghost of Troy Brown or whatever else, and then they give him Randy Moss and Wes Welker, and it's like, holy cow, look at this guy.
When think of Aaron Rodgers, and we always use Aaron Rodgers as an example. When you're a great quarterback mind who can be a coach on the field, and they say, well, of course Caleb Johnson shouldn't have been considered a starter because he's not going to be able to pass protect and adjust the way these veteran running backs are. They're going to need guys who can adjust to what Aaron Rodgers is doing. Why do we forget that with wide receivers? If you put Sky Moore and some of these other guys in that Patrick Mahomes offense, and it's Andy Reid's offense, which is like Dostoevsky's version of the West Coast offense, and you've been reading like, I don't know, the blue train goes up the hill, whatever. I mean, or a children's book or whatever version of that offense, you're not going to be prepared to make all those adjustments. So why do we think that's to get to your point? I mean, I just wanted to echo that because it's like, yeah, you need wide receivers who can read the field and be as dynamic mentally as your quarterback is. Yeah.
And so I think that Sean McDermott is a very good coach in terms of what we were talking about with Atlanta. I think that Sean McDermott, like you give a rebuilding situation, you give a young team that needs to learn how to win, needs to learn some discipline. I think that Sean McDermott is a very good coach for that type of situation. I think where the Bills are now, it just doesn't seem like McDermott is aggressive enough to lean into what they really have with Josh Allen. I think is a big part of it in big moments. And I think that that's come back to hurt them. I think that when I read Allen's body language, and when I see what's going on here, it feels to me like he knows he doesn't have the pieces around him that he needs to have around him, is where a lot of it is coming down. Like I just have this, like, I feel like there was definitely times against Miami where you would just see Allen drop back and he's just patting the ball and he is just looking downfield for literally anybody. It basically gets to the point where he just chucks it at Jackson Hawes' head because he just has to get it out of his hands, like at some level. And I think there's a lot of that going on in terms of, and defenses don't fear the Bills at all and down the field. There's nothing vertically that is striking fear at all. Then you have the report that, and this particularly frustrates me because, well, we had DK Metcalf get traded. We had George Pickens get traded. Both of those guys would be like exactly what the Bills need. And then there was the report Sunday morning that the Bills were the leaders for Jalen Waddle in this trade derby.
Oh,
And that hit the
wow.
news. Like that came out that basically the Dolphins and the Bills had more or less agreed in principle on a Waddle trade, but it was the Dolphins wanted a 26 first and the Bills were going to give them a 27 first. Was like where it and it like that was the reporting Sunday morning. So like going against the Dolphins with Waddle there, like the reporting was that basically the Bills had more or less done a trade, and that goes back to Brandon Beane. And Brandon Beane, like there was a window where they got aggressive to get Diggs, they got aggressive to get Von Miller. They were very aggressive in a short window, making big swings, and like that's completely stopped. Like they've completely stopped going out and trying to get big pieces to push the roster, and it really kind of hit a point where I think they were trying to reset the salary cap, but tend to think I don't know enough about the NFL salary cap. Like at the same time, I saw a Saints team that it seemed like had no room at all for about 15 years, somehow still be able to add big pieces continually. And so like at some level, it seemed to me of what happened with Brandon Beane is they tried to reset the salary cap because the core got old. And so then they tried to reset things, but in doing that, they stopped getting the pieces. And then I think that they definitely got sold an injured player in Amari Cooper last year at the deadline. So that was probably part of it too, of giving up premium. I think it was a 3rd round pick that they gave up for Cooper, but they gave up worthwhile draft capital, basically the same thing that George Pickens was traded for to get Amari Cooper. And Amari Cooper was done when he got to Buffalo. And so I think that probably is a part of it, of wanting to be very careful about the player that you do go out and get. But I think you had multiple opportunities. You knew that it was a problem. The wide receivers were a problem because they went out and traded for Amari Cooper last year, and then that didn't work. And then the story over the draft was that they wanted to draft a wide receiver, but the value just wasn't there every single time. And they signed Elijah Moore right after the draft was over because they missed on wide receiver. And then we saw Pickens, we saw DK Metcalf, we saw those players traded. I just think it's.
And then you heard somebody complain that Matt Collins should never have left that organization.
No, Matt Collins was, I think in a lot of levels, Matt Collins was like an emotional leader for that team, and basically he was an emotional leader for the receiver core and for just I think the team in general. And they signed Josh Palmer instead. And I mean, on paper, you think Josh Palmer is a better player than Matt Collins. I can't exactly fault them for thinking that, but I can fault them for not having the right read on the chemistry and all that, because you see Hollins go flip over to New England and it seems like everything like clicks, and like we didn't like any of the receivers that the Patriots have. Now it's like, yeah, they got great guys now. It's like Drake May's great and all this stuff. And it's like, it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think it's not a little bit tongue in cheek that I think Matt Collins is definitely a difference maker in all of that. But I just think the team got old. I think on some level, the league figured out McDermott and his defense, is particularly the Chiefs. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, he was the defense coordinator for the Eagles for Andy Reid when they were there. So Patrick Mahomes picks that defense apart like no other. He knows that defense like the back of his hand. So you're kind of schematically against it there. You don't necessarily have the blue chip players. You have, I think Josh Allen's the best quarterback in the NFL, but when you don't have all the blue chip pieces around it, it's not Peyton Manning and he's still got Marvin Harrison Jr. and Reggie Wayne out here or that. So just a lot of things coming together. I think beating the Chiefs right before the trade deadline probably was not the very best thing to have happen, because they probably said, we got it with this team. And then I think probably on some level, there's members of that team that knew that they needed to get a piece like Jalen Waddle would have been a pretty nice piece. And it's like triply frustrating for me because my daughter's starting to get really interested in football, and Jalen Waddle's her favorite player, and she's a Dolphins fan. And I told her like 2 or 3 weeks ago, hey, there's trade rumors that Jalen Waddle might go to the Bills. And she was like, oh, I'll stop being a Dolphins fan. I'll be a Bills fan then if Jalen Waddle goes to the Bills. And so like me personally, I'm like,
Oh yeah, I
we
can
need
yeah.
this receiver desperately. And oh, by the way, like me personally, like my daughter would be all in on this guy getting traded to
Yeah, that
Buffalo.
would
And
be
then
fun.
you hear that the deal. And then I think the other part of it too is Brandon Beane's given some press conferences coming out of the draft because people were pretty vocal about him not getting a wide receiver, and he basically was pretty condescending to the fans on radio after that. And then coming out of the trade deadline, he kind of basically more or less said, I know what the proper value should be for players, and these new GMs all played fantasy football and they all just want to make these deals and it's not the right value. And it's just kind of one of those things of, you've had so many opportunities here to win the Super Bowl and you've not won the Super Bowl. You've not even gotten to the Super Bowl. So don't be condescending to me, because I haven't seen anything to suggest that you actually know how to build a Super Bowl winning roster, much less Super Bowl getting to roster. So I just think there's a lot of, I don't know if the time to just reset. And I mean, obviously Josh Allen's the piece that's not going anywhere, but I don't know. It's just a complicated time, I feel like, right now for the Bills.
Yeah, it sounds like it for sure.
And
A
that being
lot of
said, you're still 6-3 and you win all the rest of your games. You beat the Patriots. Like this, the other part of it too is like gotta get outside and touch grass, and people need to sleep and reset, because I can't do like the entire week has been, oh, the Bills are gonna miss the playoffs now at 6-3, like with Josh Allen still. It's like, come on, like
yeah. It's just got so many layers, and
yeah.
people are reactive. I mean, fan bases are reactive that way, and it's just, I think that's what we have to understand, that's, as media, as people who are in some level of media or analysis, however you want to look at it, we are definitely media. I wouldn't say journalism, but
Yeah.
we're definitely media. Um, you know, Media has to understand that that's part of the equation, that you got to let fans be fans. You can argue with them, you can have conversations and debates with them, but don't get mad when they're unreasonable. Don't get mad when they come after you because they don't like something that you said or a stance that you have, and they say things because that's what they're there to do. They they're going to root for their team. They're going to stick up for their team. They're going to stick up for their players. That's what they do. You know, and so, but it's just part of the mess, and after a while, you're right, you got to touch green grass, and when you can do that and go, that's all that is. That's all it is. Like, it's like Graham Gano when he was talking about, like, last week I saw him on X saying, or there's a report on X saying, that because of gambling, and the pressures of gambling, gamblers and fans are sending him things like, I hope you get cancer and die. And, obviously that's horrible and that's wrong. But I kind of, I made a quip about that and said, well, he should try working in a call center for a whole lot less money. Cause I had lots of employees being told that they hope they or their mother got cancer and died. And even when some of them had mothers or fathers who were dealing with cancer, and that's why they were working that extra job in the call center. I've been told that multiple times in my life. If I'm, at this rate, I should probably be riddled with cancer and already be dead at the amount of times I've been told that, and but but you have to understand that that's the nature of people being angry. And after a while, you kind of learn, you separate, you go, look, it's not personal. They make it very personal. They want it to be personal because they're angry with you, but it's not personal, because most of those people would never say that to your face. And if they did, then, there's two things that would likely happen. So, um, but at the end of the day, what would you say?
No, it's been a thing here
Yeah.
in Ohio. So in Ohio, the governor got rid of player props for college athletes. Like, so you
Yeah.
can't bet on Jeremiah Smith to score a touchdown.
Okay.
And like the whole thing around it was like, we need to protect these student athletes. And it's like, well, I'm pretty sure Jeremiah Smith is making about $5 million a year at least
Yeah.
to play football right now. And the other part, like if he were to drop the touchdown to beat Michigan, I'm sure because people couldn't bet on that prop that they would be perfectly fine with dropping the game-winning touchdown that would have beat Michigan or that would have won the national championship. But hey, you couldn't bet on the player prop, so nobody cares that he. It's like, I don't know.
Right.
I think
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's that you,
I mean, look, we all know it's wrong and it shouldn't be done where people get in their feelings and they lash out over their frustration and they take it out on somebody after they've already personally had a very bad moment and a very difficult one. And that's a reality. But it's also a reality that these players are in a world where that's going to happen. Just like you're in a world, when you're in any part of the world where things like that happen, doctors deal with it. You don't think doctors and surgeons get cussed out over things that they couldn't control but are going to happen, and they're going to be seen as evil by the people who are angry and sad with them? Or you're a manager and you have to fire somebody who's in an unfortunate circumstance, but they're doing things that might not only cost them their job, it might cost an entire team of people a job because of how they're behaving. You've got to make tough decisions. And sometimes you understand that the world is not easy that way, and that you've got to tell people bad news. You've got to deal with the reactions of people with bad news. And it's not right that the way they react, but you have to understand that you have to be okay with that. And you have to learn how to get right with that, especially if you're getting paid $5 million, which is more than some people are going to make in a lifetime. And you're going to get that in a year or 2 years or 3 years. I think it's okay for you to get right with that and figure that out and understand the realities of why you're getting paid that much money. Because the reality you're getting paid that much money is that you're dealing with those pressures at a young age, is that you have a rare talent and a rare opportunity and you're doing it in a highly competitive area where people are rabid and unreasonable. And we want to protect people as much as possible, but we also have to understand the reality that emotions are emotions and that there's a risk that you're going to be dealing with this kind of bad behavior. And it wasn't like they weren't dealing with it before when they weren't getting paid enough or paid under the table or not anything at all and couldn't afford a meal, enough food for the week. Because of the way NCAA restrictions were. So,
20 years
Yeah.
ago, tight end Ryan Hamby dropped would have been a game-winning touchdown against Texas, and nobody in Ohio could bet then, and very few people outside of Las Vegas could bet then. And Ryan Hamby did not have a very fun time after dropping that pass against Texas. But
Yeah. And he didn't deserve that, not remotely. But that's part of it's unfortunately, when you are playing on a big stage, just like you're a performer on a stage. When you have a bad night, people boo you off the stage. Sometimes they do a lot worse things that shouldn't happen, and that's where college football needs to do things to protecting people from, but the betting part isn't really the accelerant that they think it is.
no,
For that, it could be accelerant for other things. Would it be an accelerant for maybe a person with domestic violence issues to perpetrate a crime with people who aren't involved in this? Maybe, but then again, you could also say maybe there's other routes to that we need to focus on rather than that. It's complicated, it's tough. I don't know where we'd go with that. I just know that it's a reality that they're going to have to deal with. And if you're getting paid that much money, as long as there's not actual violence committed on them or threats of violence to anybody, anything criminal, then, they can say what they want.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's a good time here. We're right at the end of this. We got 6 minutes, 42 seconds. The Patriots have a 10-point lead. Justin Fields just fumbled to give the Patriots the ball within the red zone, and we'll allow our great viewers to enjoy the rest of this game. But, thank you so much for spending time with us. We appreciate you all very, very much. It's because of you that we're able to have fun and talk about these different things that we enjoy, and we hope you enjoy them as well. And best of luck this week. Go out, win your matchups, and we're definitely pulling for you. So
definitely appreciate y'all.